Stand at the edge of almost any container terminal in the United States and look up at the machine lifting boxes off the ship. 20 stories of steel. On the leg, in white paint, there is a name, ZPMC. Nearly 80% of the ship-to-shore cranes working in American ports carry that name. So do roughly 70% of the container cranes on Earth. In 2010, Chinese state-owned firms held under 1% of Europe's container terminal capacity. 8 years later, they held 10%. One of them owns 67% of the port authority that runs Piraeus. None of this was seized. All of it was announced. So how did the physical layer of world trade change hands in public? And why is the part everybody is now fighting over not the part that matters? By the end of this video, you will be able to say exactly what China owns in the port nearest you, what it does not, and which of the two should worry you. None of what follows is classified. It sits in a 2018 study by the OECD's International Transport Forum, in a U.S. Coast Guard Cyber Command bulletin on Chinese-built cranes, in a 51-page report published by 2 House committees in September 2024, in a Federal Register notice from October 2025, and in a ruling of the Supreme Court of Panama dated January 30th, 2026. Every number here was published, in public, by someone who wanted credit for it. It has just never been put in the same place. Most people reach for the debt trap template. A poor country borrows, cannot pay, and China takes the port as collateral. That is the story of Hambantota in Sri Lanka, and it is the wrong map for Europe and North America. Nothing here was foreclosed. Piraeus was an international tender run by a Greek privatization agency and ratified by the Greek parliament. Hamburg was screened by the German federal government, which forced the price of entry down before approving it. The Panama terminals were a concession granted in 1997 and renewed by a Panamanian government in 2021. Every single acquisition passed through a competition, a regulator, or a legislature. The paperwork is immaculate. That is the point. This did not happen in the dark. It happened in tender documents, quarterly filings, and press releases nobody outside the shipping trade ever read. And hold on to that figure of 80%. It comes back, and the entire story turns on it. The first purchase was Piraeus. In 2008, Greece leased 2 container piers to a subsidiary of COSCO, China's state shipping conglomerate, on a 35-year concession. Then the debt crisis arrived, and Greece was instructed by its creditors to sell state assets. In 2016, COSCO bought 51% of the Piraeus Port Authority itself for 280 million euros. In October 2021, it collected a further 16% for 88 million more. 67%. Majority control of a national port authority for less than the price of a mid-size office tower. Now stop and look at that from Athens, a country in its 6th year of austerity, ordered to privatize, receiving one serious bid. Piraeus handled around 450,000 containers in 2009. By 2019, it handled 5.65 million and had climbed into Europe's top 5. Whatever else it was not a swindle. Greece got a working port out of it. The second move was quieter, and it is the one that tells you the method. In Hamburg, COSCO wanted 35% of the Tollerort container terminal. Berlin refused, cut it to 24.99%, and approved that instead. The deal was signed on June 19, 2023. The terminal operator, HHLA, states plainly that COSCO receives no exclusive rights, no control of infrastructure, no access to IT systems or sales data. So a septic says, a minority stake with no control is meaningless. On paper, correct. In practice, a shipping line with a stake in a terminal has a reason to send its ships there rather than to the terminal next door. And in Hamburg, 1 container in 3 is already moving to or from China. The third is Rotterdam, and it is the most instructive of all. COSCO held 35% of the Euromax terminal. In 2021, it moved that holding into a vehicle called Navigator Investco, a platform it co-owns with the Silk Road Fund, the Chinese state investment fund created to finance the Belt and Road. The stake did not leave Chinese state hands, it simply stopped being listed under the name everyone was watching. Which is how you arrive at the aggregate number. The OECD's International Transport Forum found that Chinese state-owned enterprises went from under 1% of European container terminal capacity in 2010 to 10% by January 2018. Listen to that again. A tenth of the capacity of the largest trading bloc on the planet in 8 years, entirely through announced transactions. The same study noted the asymmetry, No European operator holds a majority stake in any port in China. Then, on March 4th, 2025, one press release finally got read. CK Hutchison, the Hong Kong conglomerate, announced it was selling 80% of Hutchison Ports and 90% of Panama Ports Company to a consortium of BlackRock, Global Infrastructure Partners, and Terminal Investment Limited, the terminal arm of the Swiss-Italian shipping line MSC. $22.8 billion, 43 ports, 199 berths, 23 countries, everything except the ports inside China and Hong Kong, which Hutchison kept. 2 of those berths sat at Balboa and Cristobal, at either end of the Panama Canal. Washington had already been shouting. In his inaugural address on January 20, 2025, President Trump said flatly that China was operating the Panama Canal. Secretary of State Marco Rubio flew to Panama City in early February. Within days, Panama announced it was leaving the Belt and Road Initiative. In April 2025, Panama's Comptroller General reported that Panama Ports Company owed the state around $300 million in unpaid fees, and referred the matter for criminal complaint. On January 30, 2026, Panama's Supreme Court ruled the concession unconstitutional. The ruling was published in the Official Gazette on February 23, 2026. President Mulino signed Executive Decree No. 23, ordering temporary state occupation of the terminals. APM Terminals, owned by Maersk, took over Balboa. TIL took Cristobal, both on 18-month interim contracts. Panama Ports Company has since filed a $2 billion arbitration claim. That is a complete story. Chinese-linked control of the canal's ports arrived through a contract and left through a court. The system worked. Ownership can be undone. Panama just proved it in 3 weeks, but nobody has ever unbought a crane. Here is the 80% again. ZPMC, Shanghai Zhenhua Heavy Industries, is a wholly owned subsidiary of China Communications Construction Group. In August 2020, the U.S. Department of Defense named that parent company as a Chinese military company. The September 2024 House investigation found that ZPMC builds nearly 80% of the ship-to-shore cranes in operation at U.S. ports, that its board includes senior Communist Party figures and defense contracting personnel, and that it has worked with the People's Liberation Army Ground Force. The scale is physical. ZPMC runs 6 production bases across Shanghai and Nantong, covering 6.67 million square meters with 10 kilometers of coastline. Its Changxing base alone has 5 kilometers of deep water and a heavy-duty dock 3.7 kilometers long. It owns more than 20 ocean-going transport vessels, 60,000 to 100,000 deadweight tons each, because it does not ship cranes in pieces. It builds them whole, floats them across the Pacific standing upright, and lands them on the quay assembled. Its equipment is in 106 countries. There is no second supplier at that scale. That is the whole problem, and it has nothing to do with who holds the title deed. Then the Coast Guard went looking inside them. Its cyber command teams assessed 11 crane installations and published the findings. Windows XP and Windows Server 2003 running crane systems. Telnet and FTP passing passwords in plain text. Shared administrator accounts, default passwords, no multi-factor authentication, and cellular modems fitted to crane spreaders with, in the Coast Guard's words, no purpose to enable normal crane operations. One of them connected to spreader control systems while bypassing perimeter security entirely. Those modems were not in the contracts. The House report found they were installed at certain USA ports outside existing agreements, and that ZPMC repeatedly requested remote access to cranes already operating on American soil. In February 2021, the FBI found intelligence gathering equipment on a vessel delivering ZPMC cranes to the Port of Baltimore. The stated explanation was that the modems collected usage data on equipment. Usage data for whom, sent where, and reviewed by which regulator. And this is not new territory. The world spent 5 years arguing about who owned 5G networks before noticing that the argument was about the boxes, not the owners, and that pulling installed hardware out of a live network costs billions and takes years. Cranes are worse. A ship-to-shore crane costs upwards of $10 million and works for 30 years. Be precise about the limits. The Coast Guard states that its teams have not observed any active malicious cyber activity on these crane systems, not one confirmed intrusion. The vulnerabilities are real. The exploitation is, so far, theoretical. The ownership stakes are similarly narrower than the headlines. HHLA's position is that Costco gets no operational control, no data, no strategic knowledge from Tollerort. Piraeus is a genuinely better port than it was in 2009. None of this is proof of espionage. It is proof of dependency, a single supplier from a single state, for the one machine without which a container ship is just a very large box that cannot be opened. So here is the answer to the question in the title. China does not own your port. It owns the crane standing on it, the service contract that keeps it running, the firmware inside it, and the spare part that has to arrive from Shanghai. Ownership was always the visible half. Equipment is the half nobody voted on. And Washington now knows it. On the 14th of October, 2025, the U.S. Trade Representative announced a 100% tariff on Chinese ship-to-shore cranes, effective the 9th of November, with tariffs of up to 150% proposed on gantry cranes, straddle carriers, and terminal tractors. But read the exemption. Any crane contracted before the 17th of April, 2025, and arriving before the 18th of April, 2027, is excluded entirely. The policy designed to end the dependency contains a 2-year window in which American ports can keep installing the thing it is meant to remove, and 30-year machines bought inside that window will still be lifting containers in the 2050s. Panama was never the real story. It was the loudest version of a smaller one. Title deeds are easy to take back, and a court can do it in a month. The next fight is already named in a government document, in public, in a Federal Register notice from October 2025, rubber-tired gantry cranes, stacking cranes, terminal tractors, the vehicles that move the box after the crane puts it down. The same company builds a great many of those too. The lesson is not that someone bought the ports. It is that while everyone was reading the deeds, nobody was reading the invoices. That is what this channel does. Take numbers that are already public and put them next to each other. If that is useful to you, subscribe. And in the comments, name one thing you assumed was made close to home that turned out to have exactly one factory behind it.